Hi there, my name is Conor and I'm a Customer Success Manager at Silico. In this short video I'm going to demonstrate some of the basic features within Silico. So I'm going to show you how to create a project within Silico, how to set the simulation period for a Silico project, and then also some of the main features, a brief overview of what they are on the Silico Model Builder page, as well as dashboards, optimizer tool, etc., and a few other things. So the first step to access Silico is you can either go to the Silico website, silicoai.com, and you can then click on the Silico app right here, or you can also go directly to that address. You can go to silico.app and you'll be brought to this homepage. So from here you can sign in if you already have an account. If you don't, you can create an account and follow the instructions there. If you sign in via Google, you'll be brought into your homepage of your account essentially. So here you'll see all the projects that you've worked on before. So the next step is to create a project in Silico. So to do that, we can just click on the Create Project button in the top right corner. We're then prompted to give a name to the project, as well as a slug, which essentially is the text that goes at the end of the URL. We can also give a description of the project to help others understand what it's about. And if we're in an enterprise account, we can then save the project either to our own personal account within that, or to the main enterprise account so that other people in our organization can access that. You can then select whether or not this is a public project or a private project. So if I tick this box, it's going to be public, and essentially if you have a free account, that means you only can do one public project. So I'm going to use that in this case, and that's shared then under the Creative Commons license. So then I click Create and I'm brought to the Model Builder page right here. So this is the page where you'll create your model in Silico, and there's also a number of other tabs that will give you a quick tour of here. So this is the Data tab, where you can essentially create data frames and import data from Excel spreadsheets or SAP systems, etc., whatever you're using within your model. You also have the Dashboards tab. So this is where you can create interactive dashboards where decision makers can interact with your model through a simple dashboard, as opposed to having to kind of dig into the details of the model itself. This is the Notice Rules feature, so you can add alerts within your model for certain behaviors. And then you also have the optimization feature, which allows you basically to optimize the allocation of budget, for example, or the allocation of FTEs to a process. So this is another feature that we'll go through in a future video. But if we return back to the Model Builder page, what we have here essentially on the left is the project structure. So as we add new sections or panels or submodels to the model, they will appear here, so it allows us to navigate easily between those. We also have the scenarios here in the bottom left corner, and that's another feature that we'll go through in a future video. At the bottom of the screen, what you see is essentially the time bar. So that represents the time over which the simulation is happening, and that's actually probably the most important first step in creating your model, is to set the simulation period and the time units in which you're simulating. So to do that, we can go to the Project tab in the top left corner here. So here we're able to save the project, share it, export to file, or close. For now though, we're just going to look at project settings. So here we can set under calendar time the start date, the start time, this time unit that we're running in, and how many steps we're going to run. So for how many months, for example, we're going to run the simulation for. So the first thing to set is the start date. Generally speaking, one of the most important ways we can validate a Silico model is comparing simulations of the model to actual historical data. So for that reason, we generally want to set the start date as a date in the past, so that we have that historical data to compare against. So I've set this as the 1st of January 2021, and it's going to start at midnight. The next thing to choose is a really important decision, which is around the time units that your model is going to run in. So we have a choice of seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years. So the decision here depends on the needs of the model. If the model wants to represent processes that happen over days, if you want to capture that level of granularity, then you should choose days as the time unit. Essentially the rule here is that you want to set the time unit based on the smallest time steps that you want to any variable in your model to run in. So if only one variable in my model, if I want to capture revenue per day or orders per day, even if it's only one variable, that will determine basically what we should set as the time units, even if all other variables are going to be run in weeks or months or years. If there's one variable running days, then I want to capture that, because if I set this as weeks, I can't actually capture what's happening on a daily basis. So in this case, I'm going to set the time units as days, and then the next thing to decide is the number of steps. So that's basically for how many days in this case is the simulation going to run through. So here it's 60, so we can see it goes from January 1st to March 2nd, 2021. Obviously we're generally making projections about the future, so in this case I want to project forward from today onwards to, let's say, the end of 2026. So for that I'm going to do 2,190 days, which is going to bring me up to December 31st, 2026. So that's the period over which the simulation is now running. There's one more feature here, which is units per step. So I generally would advise leaving this as 1. If you set it to 2, what that means is that the software will essentially calculate 2 values for every day. So one for the start of the day and one for halfway through the day, essentially. Or if you set it to 3, it will calculate 3 times per day. But I think generally, for simplicity of understanding, it's better to leave this to 1, because that kind of reduces any complexity that arises from that. So if we now click on Save Changes, that will save those that simulation period for the model, and we can see down here at the time bar, it's starting from January 31st, 2021, and it's going to run until December 31st, 2026. So we can explore that. That obviously not only affects the time bar, but also the different elements within the model. So if we right click here, we get this menu where we can essentially add variables, flows and stocks, as well as a number of other different features that we'll cover in later videos. For now I'm just going to add a variable and show you how setting the time settings affects this variable. So here we have the variables inspector, which we'll go through following this as well. And we can see here that basically this variable is going to hold a value for every single day between January 1st, 2021 all the way down to December 31st, 2026, as we can see there. So that's essentially what we're doing when we set the simulation period and the time units in which we run our model. If, for example, we were to run it in months, then what we would see here would be gaps between January to February to March, as opposed to showing all the days in between. Or if we run it in years, we would see 2021 to 2022 to 2023, etc. So just to demonstrate also another feature of the time bar, so if we put some random data into here for now, what we can do with the time bar is also choose up until when we simulate. So we can kind of move forward using these arrows here. So this is bringing us forward, as you can see, 1 day at a time. And we can use that, for example, to simulate up until the present, and then introduce some decision variables, and then we can click here to bring the data all the way down to the end of the simulation period. We can also use these 2 bars to the left here to shorten the time that we're displaying data for. So for example, we can just show maybe 1 month worth of data if we bring it in here, to kind of highlight in or zoom in on a bit of data and simulate, for example, over the next month what's going to happen under our given assumptions. Okay, so if we reset the time bar to the start and end of the simulation period, and now we can explore just some of the last features within Silico to give you kind of a broad overview of what's in here. So as we said, within project you can save project, so that's going to save your changes, and then you can also have a versioning system here. So basically, if I was to make some additions to this project, save it again, I could easily go back to the previous version where there was just 1 variable. And it's been quite handy if we make changes to the model that later we decide we want to revert, we can use the versioning system to do that. So there's also a feature where we can share the model. So we can simply create a share link, copy that link, send it to someone else, and they can access that model as long as they have a Silico account. We can also export it to file if they want to import that model, which can be done here essentially on the home page. Instead of clicking create project, you can click this arrow and import project that way. And there's also a few features here within edit, so we can obviously undo, redo, all the usual shortcuts that are there. And within help we see the documentation as well as the tutorials. The documentation brings you to this page on our website where basically you can read about all the different features, some of which we're going through today, so core simulation elements, data tables, formula, etc. So that can be a great place to answer any questions that you have. And within the help section you also have the tutorial, which you would have been brought through when you set up your Silico account. So a few last things to show you on the model builder page. So in the top right corner here we have the pause execution button, and what that does is essentially stops the software from calculating any new variables. So if we introduce another variable here, connect this here, generally if we were to click this variable here it will update immediately, but if we turn on pause execution and we put in that formula, it doesn't update. And the reason we've introduced that is for very large models sometimes it can take a few seconds for all the new calculations to be made, and that can prevent you from changing the structure of the model, or it can be a bit cumbersome to do so. So it's handy in that case to turn on pause execution, make the changes to the model, and then turn it off. So in this case I can turn off pause execution, reload the page, and now it's going to make those calculations. So that essentially just helps in those situations where you have very large models that have a lot of calculations and the software can take a few seconds to update. So we also have the zoom feature in the bottom right corner here, so we can zoom in and zoom out. And finally we have the notices feature. So this is where basically when we create notice rules here in this tab, if the model ever triggers those notices or alerts, that's where we'll see them here, just in this bottom section. So that concludes the video for today. We thought this would be a useful video just to give you a brief overview of the model builder, as well as how to set the simulation period for your models. In future videos we'll be going into a bit more detail about each of these features, but yeah, we just felt that this would be a useful overview to give you an idea of all the different things on the model builder page. So thanks a lot for your time. I hope that's been useful, and take care.